My name's Olga Stanojlovic. I'm chairwoman of the Serbian Council of Great Britain, and I would like to welcome you to Serbian Month, which is a festival of Serbian culture in Britain, which is now in its 13th year. The Serbian Council is delighted to host a talk by Lieutenant Colonel Ewen Southby-Tailyour for the second time. For those of you who have not met him, Ewen's a retired Royal Marine, a sailor, a British Yachtsman of the Year in 1982, an author of many military histories and biographies, and 2 novels. He's going to talk to us today about his time as a British monitor with the European Community Monitoring Mission and the Secret Intelligence Services in the Republic of Serbian Krajina and Croatia from the autumn of 1993 to the spring of 1994. He resigned from his post in 1994 after being asked by his EU superiors to falsify his daily reports concerning the breaking of UN arms embargo 713, which was then in force. This illegal rearming of Croatia was the prelude to Operation Storm, which started on the 4th of August 1995 and led to the ethnic cleansing of over 200,000 Serbs from the Republic of Serbian Krajina, where they had lived for over 500 years. Ewen has told the story in 2 books, his novel, Death Sting, Duplicity and Deceit in the Balkans, which he has said is 90% true, and the newly published Paid to Predict, his un-redacted diaries, which some in this audience encouraged him to publish after hearing him talk a couple of years ago. So I think it's over to you, Ewen, and we look forward to hearing what I know is going to be a very engaging and entertaining presentation.
Thank you, Olga. Firstly, I have to say that I find this the most embarrassing thing I've ever done. It's not like standing up in front of a yacht club's membership and giving a talk. This is actually somehow more personal, and I can see you all staring at me. Anyway, I ought to say at the very beginning that this is not about what happened in the former Republic of Yugoslavia and all the machinations there, and to be brutally honest, pretty unpleasant actions by all sides. But this is the story of the eventual ethnic cleansing of 200,000 Serbs from the Krajina area, which was the border between Croatia and Herzegovina. I can never do that, but anyway, you know where I mean. And Krajina is the word for border. And what has always puzzled me is that the Krajinan Serbs had lived there for 500 years. But the press always tried to indicate that they had only sort of moved in and to be moved out, which is of course absolutely wrong. What we're going to do is, through about 25 slides, is just to give you the salient points that led up to Operation Storm, as witnessed by me. I didn't witness Operation Storm, and I didn't actually witness firsthand any of the illegal arming. However, there was enough evidence for me to be able to write the book. But as you will discover, I was then prevented from really discovering what was happening by being told to falsify my daily reports. And at that stage, as a reasonably honest retired Royal Marines officer, I felt it was time to pull out. But I sadly was not surprised at what happened a year later. I think you can't probably see all this, but I think we should start with, before I joined, I was actually asked by the United Nations to do something else. And during that briefing, I'm going to quote what I was told. The United States regards the United Nations as a huge condom, which America believes it can wear to fuck the rest of the world with impunity and without paying for it. And this was stated to me by an assistant general to the United Nations, then Secretary General Boutros Boutros-Ghali. So at a pretty senior level, we got this rather vulgar, but I think rather correct statement. And that clouded an awful lot of what I and others got up to out there, always mindful of the Americans. Now, at the beginning, and I won't go bore you with the machinations of how I became involved, but they asked, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office asked me to a meeting in King Charles Street. Over some years before, long before I got involved, they had supplied monitors to the European Community Monitoring Mission across the former Republic of former Republic of Yugoslavia. And they were looking for monitors, and I was asked to be one. But before I went, somehow my name got involved with somebody else, which we'll now see. And I was invited by the SIS, or better known as the MI6, to a series of briefings in this restaurant in Romilly Street, Soho, which, as far as I could work out at the time, was actually not a restaurant at all, but it was a private eating house for SIS guys from across the river. And if you want to go there now, it may well be a restaurant, but it wasn't a public restaurant then. It's moved. So it's now probably a decent place, but it was a very suspicious place. I actually knocked on the door at the appointed hour of 12:30, and there was absolutely no reply, no lights, no nothing. So I went to the pub opposite and had a glass of Guinness and went back 2 minutes later, well, sorry, 10 minutes later, and it was opened, and I was welcomed with open arms. The whole thing was beginning to make me not suspicious, but beginning to understand what it was all about. What the SIS wanted me to do was not just be an ordinary monitor, which is what the FCO wanted to do. And I know there are monitors here listing, Michael Shuttleworth in particular. And I don't think, in fact, I'm certain there wasn't anyone who had been approached by MI6 to keep an eye, in my case, keep an eye on 1 or 2 people, and also to try and monitor the possible breaking of the embargo 713. Well, I arrived in Zagreb, the capital of Croatia, and this is one of the maps I was given, and I won't bore you with it. You can see that it was as complicated as it looks. And it was complicated enough where I was in Croatia and Krajina, let alone where everybody else was. But Michael Shuttleworth would probably know more about that than I do. Well, after Zagreb and briefings, which were, I have to say, pretty ineffectual, I was sent to Knin, which is the then capital of the Republic of Serbian Krajina. And I have to say that when Croatia got its independence, thanks almost totally due to German influence, they also, of course, came with them were the Krajinian Serbs in the border regions. And Knin was now designated the capital. It was, let's be honest, an illegal, in terms of international law, an illegal performance to form the RSK, as we called it. But it was absolutely understandable. To begin with, this was the motel where we lived, but it was also the meeting place for diplomats, generals, international journalists. It was a real hotbed of just about every sense of detritus from the people who follow these events. The bar was an extraordinary and really quite frightening place, because you didn't know who you were speaking to. I eventually had drinks with Milan Babic, who became, in fact, on the night he became the first, I think, the first president of the RSK. But we were always being watched by soldiers, fully armed. It was an uneasy place. My room was actually right in the middle, underneath the O&T of hotel. Just as a sideline, the ECM observers, you'll know of Misha Glenny if you're interested in this part of the world, who I think is probably the finest author of things that went on. And he wrote, throughout the wars in Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, the monitors were strange figures. They emerged from their vehicles dressed all in white and projecting a clean, even dreamlike quality. It was as though they were emissaries from outer space who had been sent to save the human race from itself. Well, that was Misha Glenny, who is a very fine historian of Yugoslavia. I'm not sure that I felt like an emissary from outer space, and I certainly didn't save anybody. And that, of course, was part of the tragedy for all of us. Well, in Kanin, and actually on both sides of the border, because when the RSK announced its independence from Croatia, which was then a legally constituted country, it was a terrible time. I wasn't there. Well, I was there towards the end. No, I was there. Anyway, it was pretty bloody, and the confrontation line between Croatia and the RSK was very movable, and there were United Nations people on either side, and there were United EU monitors on either side, trying to. In the end, I'm not quite sure what we were trying to do. We had no influence over whether the ceasefires were holding or not. And in my case, in Kanin, all we seemed to do was deliver teddy bears and mail from the other side, if the Serbs let it through, if the Croatians let them out. And it was a pretty difficult time, not for me, but for the RSK people. And I have to say, and I'm sure Olga will forgive me, not everybody comes out of this cleanly. At one stage, myself and my driver were stopped by a roadblock with some very drunk Serbian soldiers, very drunk Serbian soldiers on rakia, the sort of the white. It's pretty revolting stuff anyway. And they fired a burst of AK-47 inside the Land Rover, in through the passenger door where I was sitting, out through the driver's door by my driver. So that was pretty close to our noses. I'd rather hoped, as it happened, that he was going to hit his friend on the other side, but unfortunately the bullets went into the dirt. It was a pretty unpleasant occasion for everybody, both sides, and the UN and the EU monitors. Well, I got up to all sorts of shenanigans, trying to balance being a EU monitor and therefore totally open and upright. And when I say the book's called Deceit, I've got it here, Duplicity, Deceit and Dishonesty Among Allies, I have to say that Great Britain was covered by that. Hence, people like me were being invited to do things behind the scenes, which of course was not part of the EU deal. One of the things I was invited, well, I wasn't invited to, but I did. If you look at the very bottom right-hand corner of the map, there's a lake. At the bottom right-hand side of the lake, there's a place called Karen Plaza. And our interpretress in the Land Rover then said, that is Serbia's only exit to the Mediterranean. And I thought, right, I better go and do a beach reconnaissance of this place. So that's it, the picture at the bottom. And we went there, actually it was being shelled when we went there, ostensibly to interview the headmaster, or headmistress it was, of the local school, and the mayor. And we were being shelled as this was happening. And we had to move from one house to another, which had a hole in the roof. And I thought, if I'm going to do a beach recce, I'm going to have to think of some reason. So I said, look, I must have a pee. Well, there's no running water. So somebody said, you've got to go out into the sea if you want to have a pee, which is exactly what I wanted to do. So I walked across the beach, rolled up my trousers, took my shoes off, and waded in for what was probably the longest pee in Serbian history. While I wriggled my feet, Roger Dillon would know how you conduct a sort of a covert beach reconnaissance, and worked out the exits and the trafficability of the sands and all this. When I turned around, as I knew I was being guarded by soldiers, UN soldiers, there was an Argentinian soldier with what I took to be Malvinas War medals. And I regret to say I burst out with laughter. After all, I was still wading in the sea. And he said, what are you laughing at? And I couldn't tell him that here was I doing a reconnaissance of somebody else's beach, when of course I'd done it down south. Anyway, that beach reconnaissance report went back to MI6. As I say, it could have been one of Croatia's entries into Krajina, but in fact it was never used. Now, one of the people I did meet out there was Dragan Vilas, I can't pronounce it, Olga, I'm sorry. But he was, I sent a report off to the MI6 and it came back pretty strict. We could only use letters. We couldn't use any form of electronic telephones or anything. So I had to write. So it was pretty slow round journey for letters. But Dragon, Captain Dragon, as he was known, MI6 came back and said, well, his name is Daniel Snedden, and we'd be quite interested in him. And he was a Serb officer, and eventually he was accused by Croatia, long after it was all over, of war crimes. Interpol issued an arrest warrant in the late 1990s. In 2006, he was detained in Australia, but he was actually Australian, although he spoke with a South African accent. And he was extradited to Split in 2015, and in 2017 sentenced to 15 years, later reduced. Anyway, you can read it, but he was released in March. I can't see what it says at the bottom because there's something in the way. Anyway, he's been released. I actually got on very well with him and went to see him 2 occasions. The first time, absolutely openly in white uniform, as we had to wear, with my then boss, a Frenchman called Paul Ottelin, a very intelligent, urbane, lovely man. But the second time, Dragon asked me to go in civilian clothes, and I could only do this through the courtesy of the Canadian UN troop that was guarding that part of Krajina. And one of the many things he told me, which of course went back to MI6, was that he was training the San Marco battalion of Italian Marines. And I asked him why. In fact, I saw them, and I asked why, and I recognized them as being San Marco battalion. And he said, well, we're training them. We've been asked to train them by Italy against the day that Italy wants to take back that part of Istria in the north of the Adriatic, which they lost in the war, in the World War. And you can imagine that I was getting a bit confused now, whose side was who on. And you can see why the duplicity, deceit, and dishonesty between European allies comes into the story. Well, by some subterfuge, which I won't bore you with, which you read about in the book, partly because I didn't tell anybody that I spoke French, well, not very good French, but French enough. And for the first month or so in Canines, I sat in the back of a Land Rover with 2 French-speaking, a Belgian and a Frenchman in the front. And I never told them I spoke French, and they thought when they spoke French I wouldn't understand a word they were saying. But I eventually discovered that there was a place available, an EU monitor's base available on the coast at Split, which is of course where MI6 wanted me and where, well, the Foreign Office didn't actually mind where I was, because my reports back were reasonably to do with the EU work, which is what they wanted to know, but there were sidelines. But anyway, I heard that this place was vacant, so I went and saw Paul Ottelin, our French boss in Canines, and he readily agreed that I should move to Split. I didn't tell him why, obviously, but I eventually moved to the Hotel Split, which is now called the Radisson Blue Hotel, and I always described it then as the 5-star hotel without the stars. It was, and this is my room 519, and that on the right-hand side, you can't see it, is the entrance to Split's naval dockyard and of course the civilian port. The most ideal place to have my bedroom. Or my first night there, but it's not part of the story, is that I was just about to go. I was walking through the lobby bar, and I heard shouting behind me, and turned round in time to see 2 Croatian soldiers fighting, and then there was a pistol shot, and one of them fell to the ground with a bullet hole in his head. And I thought, as I think my military friends will know, in the old days as duty officer, you'd sort of intervene. I thought, no, this is not the job of an EU monitor, so I went to bed. The next morning, I went down, and there in the lobby bar, they'd cut out the blood-stained carpet with a very ragged, huge hole, concrete underneath, and 2 Croatian policemen there, and they saw me in my white uniform and said, no, why are you interested? I said, well, I saw what happened last night. And they said, oh, well, we heard that somebody had committed suicide, or not suicide, what you call it, Russian roulette. And I said, well, I'm sorry, you're wrong. You don't play Russian roulette with a Croatian issue 9mm Browning lookalike. And they said, well, who do you think we ought to look for? I said, well, I'll lay you a bet there's 2 were Americans, although in Croatian uniform. I don't know what happened after that, but anyway, we moved on. Well, one of the reasons why the Serbs of Krajina were extremely worried about Croatia having its independence, which of course included them because they were part of Croatia, is the re-emergence of the swastika on soldiers' armbands, the checkerboard motif of the old Ustazi, the introduction of the kuna instead of the Croatian dinar, which the kuna was an old Ustazi currency, and of course the figure U for Ustazi, which was painted, as was the swastika, on all, not all, no, that's rubbish, on many public buildings and across the roads at intersections and roundabouts and so on. And the Croatian Serbs had every right. I know it was illegal what they did, but they had every right to really worry about their future. And of course, in the end, they were absolutely proved right. And as I said, at the bottom, the Serbs in Croatia were deeply concerned about this whole business and declared their own independence before my time, but this is why they did it. Well, just to sort of, I should have put this slide in earlier. You can see Croatia is from Pula to Osijek in the east, Dubrovnik in the south, and Zagreb to the north, and then Bosnia-Herzegovina to the south and east. The red bits are the Krajina, Republic of Serbian Krajina, and that is what they took over. And of course, that's where the war between Croatia and RSK was being fought along the very fluid confrontation line. And you can see where Krajina is right at the very bottom, the capital, and quite close to Split. Anyway, that should have slide been in earlier, it's my fault. Well, in Croatia, there were tragedies on every side. This is a Serbian couple living in Croatia, the only inhabitants living in a destroyed Croatian village close to the confrontation line. I just show this because it is absolutely typical, and to be fair, what happened on both sides of the confrontation line. For instance, in the RSK, I went and saw a village which was full of Croatian ladies and one Croatian man, and they were being guarded by Kenyan soldiers from the United Nations. I mean, the whole thing was an absolute mess. And actually, whilst just after that photograph was taken, and I have to say that the bread that the lady produced was, I still think, the finest bread I've ever eaten in my life, ever. The wine was pretty rough, as it always was, but rather attractive for that. But shortly after this, there was a tremendous burst of heavy machine gun fire, so .5s. And well, I went off to have a look and see what it was at. But as always, nothing really was visible. But that was a reasonably typical part of our work, was to try and look after these people. Now, it all boiled down eventually to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 713. I can't read all of it because on the side there's some photographs of us. But the arms embargo adopted unanimously on the 25th of September 1991 until the Council decides otherwise, noting the continued hostilities in light of the outbreak of fighting in the country. The resolution, I can't read, implements an embargo on all deliveries of weapons and military equipment to the Yugoslav Socialist Federal Republic. The resolution applies to all constituent states. And that really, although I knew that from before I left England, because that was given to me, well, I read it anyway. Well, in Split, and I won't bore you with the incredibly complicated arrangements, but Paul Ottoland, the wonderful French, urbain head of the whole of this part of the monitoring mission, left and went off to, I think, to be ambassador to Kuwait or somewhere in the Middle East. He spoke Arabic, and oddly enough, I spoke then reasonably better Arabic than I spoke French. And he and I would discuss things in the Land Rover shortly after we'd been to see Captain Dragon, actually. And he suddenly said in Arabic, don't talk in French, because of course the interpretresses spoke some French. Nobody else spoke Arabic. But anyway, he had left. And then we got a chap whose photograph you'll see shortly called Jean-Pierre Thibault, who Michael Shuttleworth has met. And it was, I got a message from an airfield monitor who was monitoring the port of, oh, Michael, can you remember? Right in the north, Pula, I think. And he had sent us, myself, a message in Split. I was now the leader of the Split monitoring team, saying that he had discovered German aircraft and tanks being imported by sea into northern Croatia, which of course was totally against the Embargo 713. And I then realized that as Ploče to the south, in between us in Split and Dubrovnik further south, was probably even more of a major port. And if sure as hell, if things were coming into the northern port, they were coming into Ploče. So although we'd monitored it over the months, we hadn't really monitored it as seriously as we might, because we didn't believe that that anybody would really try and break the embargo so dramatically. So we started monitoring it, and I never saw anything come through Ploče, but on the road leading north, there were always covered wagons. There were Americans now flooding the bars and hotels, American soldiers, Americans in Croatian soldiers' uniform. And it was quite clear that there was a build-up of arms and ammunition. I then decided, well, we have got to monitor Ploče in a properly military manner and get to the bottom of this. Well, my immediate boss then, who changed from being a rather delightful English ex-cavalry officer stationed in Zagreb, was now a Greek called Captain Vasilis Detailis, who claimed to have been to the Greenwich Staff College, or claimed to have had friends who went to the Greenwich Staff College. And I discussed with him, I said, come on, Vasilis, we've got to monitor it. He said, yes, I want you to monitor it, but our new French boss, called Jean-Pierre Thibault, has ordered us not to. So what I've got to ask you to do is to monitor Ploče, but falsify your daily reports. This was after I'd known him for some months, and I was sort of getting the gist of what he wanted. But of course, Greece was supporting Serbia, and France was supporting Croatia. There shouldn't have been any support either side. It should have been absolutely unbiased. The whole point of the European monitoring mission was that it was supposed to have been unbiased. Anyway, to cut a very long and unpleasant story short, Vasilis invited me to meet him in the middle of Šibenik Bridge. Well, we knew that our rooms in room 519 and his rooms in the hotel in Zagreb, in Zadar, were monitored, were bugged. No question of it. So we met. Oh, sorry. One of the things we did discover on the island of Brač was this airfield at the bottom, which is actually a modern photograph. I didn't take a photograph of it because our interpretresses were never quite reliable. And she knew that I was taking a photograph of this airfield at Brač. We would have been ambushed by the local police probably, and all cameras were always stamped on if they were caught in a car. So you didn't really take too many photographs. And as my camera was my mother's 1938 Leica, I was keen for this not to happen. But we discovered the Brač airfield, although the mayors of various cities and towns in Brač, who were wonderful people, I have to say they're not at all like the mainland Croatians. And they said, no, there's no airfield here. Well, our interpretress then, a rather interesting lady called, can't remember her name. Anyway, we found this place and there was not a soul there. So I got over the fence and walked the 4,000 feet of its length, and eventually got back, and our interpretress was furious with me because she thought I was spying, which of course I was, I suppose. A week later, I have to say, and I didn't know this until only 3 or 4 years ago, the German military attaché had done the same and got arrested. So I'm probably lucky to get away with it. But eventually it was used to as a base for the Predator drone, whatever, UAVs or whatever they're called, which was sent to the Brač airfield, you can see there, and to elsewhere. I think they were sent to Albania as well. And these were for trials, because the trials in the Mojave Desert had not been completed. But President Clinton sent some to Brač to gather intelligence on behalf of the Croatians. Here is Captain Vasilis Detilis. Some of you who might have been at Naval Staff holidays might recognize him. He was the Greek head of the ECMM's coordinating center in Zagreb, and Zadar, in other words, my boss. He wanted Greece to know of any embargo busting, but needed to stop France and the EU from doing the same, because the French did not want the embargo busting to be discovered. Otherwise, they would have to try and put a stop to it. But they were happy for it to happen. And the next photograph, I've chosen the most unpleasant photograph I can possibly find of Jean-Pierre Thibault, who was my Detilis and my boss in Cannes. He was the head of the French regional center. He did not want France to know of any embargo busting, for then he would have to take action and openly try and prevent it. He was the most unpleasant man I think I've ever met in my life. I'm a great Francophile. I went to a French university, I served with the French commanders, I've got a house in France. But he really was the most unpleasant sod I'd ever met in my life. He didn't drink at lunchtime, which didn't endear him to the rest of my monitoring team. And for some extraordinary reason, he was eventually sacked, but after my time, and ended up, amazingly, as the French ambassador to Ireland. God knows what Ireland did to deserve him. Anyway, I could not give a damn who knew of the embargo busting, but I was ordered to falsify my reports at a meeting in the middle of Šibenik Bridge, where Detilis had summoned me. And just for the record, that is Šibenik Bridge. And we parked our Land Rover at each side, because I came up from the south and he came down from the north. And he walked to the middle and we had this extremely acrimonious discussion where we knew we weren't being bugged. But it was at that stage I realized that this was beyond my, awful expression, beyond my pay packet. I was not going to falsify reports to satisfy either the Greeks or the French. Well, whilst all this was going on, there were problems, and we were warned more than often by the British Foreign Office, by the Serbs, the Croatians, the UN, that if push came to real shove, the EU monitors, unprotected by anybody and unarmed, of course, would have to make their own way out of the country, out of Croatia, pretty smartish. So with the help of the harbour master of Split Harbour, who happened to be the Royal Cruising Club's foreign port representative, who I'd never met before, but I met then, I had to take him slightly into my confidence. And he found this yacht, which was really ready to sail, at least motor, and she had half a tank full of fuel, and we could get to the east coast of Italy if things really got a bit difficult, and we were worried enough that they would. So anyway, Eloise was our escape yacht chosen. I won't bore you with Operation Storm, and I certainly won't bore the Serbs with Operation Storm. It was a pretty aggressive and destructive operation on the 4th of August. Prior to Operation Storm, though, US American Air Force prowlers, US Marine prowlers, destroyed all the Serb communications in the hours prior to Operation Storm. And you can't see it at the bottom, but there was a A-17 or something fighters then attacked all the Serb anti-aircraft batteries around Cannes in particular, which was the focus of attention. And gosh, if you tell me that America wasn't involved, that's it. It was a pretty bloody arrangement, but it was also pretty one-sided. So I think I can't see at the bottom, 137,000 Croatians versus about 30,000 Serbs across a pretty long confrontation line. It was a slaughter. And of course, 200,000 Krajinian Serbs were ethnically cleansed from their 500-year-old homeland, and about 20,000, plus or minus, nobody knows, were murdered. And the reports, you can read them. If you read the book, Pay to Predict, there are links to all sorts of books that describe the carnage. Absolutely. It was the worst case of ethnic cleansing since the Holocaust. And I know everybody did awful things to everybody else in the former Republic of Yugoslavia, but this was by far the worst. And of course, the world commented. That's the Sunday Times. Janes, who I eventually worked for on the bottom left-hand side, actually uses the word ethnic cleansing. At one stage, the American Secretary of State, I think it was told that the Croats had ethnically cleansed the Serbs, and he said they didn't. Ethnic cleansing is something that only the Serbs do. And I have to say, of all the repugnant things I heard out there, that was probably the most repugnant. Well, Franjo Tudman should have been extradited for war crimes. He wasn't. But after his death, there was a new chairman of the International Committee for War Crimes, or whatever it was called, who said, and she was a lady, said if he had survived, he would have been indicted. And of course, Clinton, he actually personally sanctioned the breaking of UN arms embargo. Then he personally, and I mean this, actually spoke to Tudjman and gave the go-ahead for Operation Storm, and thus the ethnic cleansing of 200,000 Serbs. And why he has never been indicted for a war crime, which is impossible since the Holocaust, nobody knows. Well, this is, you can't see it at the bottom, at least I can't see it. This is the point of any questions, Olga. But you can see this is a Evening Standard cartoon, which actually does sum up in many respects the problems out there.
Thank you very much, Ewan, for your talk. We've had one question so far. Well, it's a comment, which is from Marco. I think that must be Marco Gasic, who said, Ewan, you say that Croatia was a legally constituted entity, but Croatia wasn't constituted legally as an independent state. It was unilaterally, i.e. illegally declared independence from the rest of Yugoslavia, and was the legally constituted state, which was the legally constituted state. The Krajina Serbs insisted on their right to remain in Yugoslavia, the country of their birth and choice. It was only when Germany strong-armed everybody to accept Croat UDI that the Krajina Serbs formed the RSK as a response to the new German-dominated political landscape, in which the illegal had, simply been pronounced legal by the big German elephant in the room against general opposition, including Britons. I don't know, Marco, if you want to say anything or if you want to respond to that, Ewan.
No, I'm not going to, I can't argue with a Serb about the history of his country. All I know is that Croatia was a legally accepted country, and the Krajinian Serbs are part of that country. And it was after the introduction of the Nazi and Ustazi symbols that, it is as far as I can work out, it was the reason why Krajina, understandably but sadly illegally, declared independence from the newly independent Croatia. I have a statement here in the book, if I can read it. This is actually from Lord Carrington, speaking in the United Nations, or speaking on behalf, that the Serbian population in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Croatia is entitled to all the rights concerned to minorities and ethnic groups, and that the Republic must afford the members of those minorities and ethnic groups all the human rights and fundamental freedoms recognized in international law, including, this is the point, where appropriate, the right to choose their nationality. And he was referring in particular to Krajina.
Marco, do you want to say anything on that? I mean, you can unmute yourself if you'd like.
Basically, everyone knew that Tudjman had illegally simply declared one part of Yugoslavia not to be part of Yugoslavia. No one accepted that at first. The UN didn't accept it. The EC didn't accept it. Lord Owen obviously was one of those people who said we have to negotiate all the borders in the contested state, not allow bits of it to just pronounce themselves independent and to take away reluctant Remainers with them, because basically Croatia got its borders within Yugoslavia, not without Yugoslavia. And so it was only when Germany said, well, whatever you other European community countries do, we are going to recognize this illegal UDI as legal. And the Vatican indeed was the second, I think, country to join in. Imagine if in Northern Ireland the majority Catholic government had simply declared UDI without the UK in London agreeing at all, and then Germany said, yeah, we're going to support that, and the rest of the EU is going to support that, and we don't give a toss what you think in London. You're not being consulted. It's a fact. Hard luck. Bye-bye. Now, Croatia was even more contested than Northern Ireland is, so you can imagine how controversial that was, as you yourself, Ewan, say, to a people that on the borderlands who had been victims of genocide in their parents' generation, and were seeing the return of the symbols of genocide again, Ustashi symbols, and now they were being told that they had to stay with their past and probably future oppressors. So it was illegal, immoral, shouldn't be done. Germany forced everybody to do it. And it was, as I say, it became retrospectively declared legal, but that didn't mean it was a legal act when it happened.
Yeah, I follow all that, but as I said, you know from because you're a Serb, I assume. Yeah. I can't possibly comment about somebody's. I mean, I agree with you, but I don't think I can comment further because you said probably more explicitly than what I can say.
Marcus also, if I can just say, mentioned that the number of Serbs ethnically cleansed out of Krajina Operation Storm was 235,000, according to Larry Hollingsworth, head of the UNHCR at the time. But lesser known was the cleansing of a further 120,000 Serbs from the adjacent Bosnian Krajina at the same time. Source ICRC, bringing the total number to 355,000. Stan's asked a question. He says, thank you for your presentation, Ewan, and my compliments on your excellent book. Did you get any official reaction to the publication of these sensitive materials or the previous fictional version? How did you gauge whether it was right time to publish without getting into hot water?
Well, my Rotherham friends who are watching will know that I've never been particularly worried about getting into hot water. I didn't give it a second thought, Olga, frankly. It was a story that I had witnessed. It was a story that I felt ought to be published. The interesting thing is that I couldn't find a publisher. If I might blow my own trumpet for a second, I've been published by, I think, every single one of the big publishers, Penguin, Random House, and all the rest of it. Nobody wanted to touch this for reasons which you can probably all guess. Eventually, I found a rather strange publisher with whom I do not have a happy relationship, but he published it, and he did, although nobody else has ever done this before with any of my books, insist that I had it read for libel, which I did, and there was not a great deal. I had to sign the Official Secrets Act with the Foreign Office did, but that is now, I think it covers about 20, I think it's been reduced from 30 to 25 years. And in the end, Olga, to answer your question, absolutely straightforward, I couldn't give a damn what people, the official people think in Parliament or government or it was a story that I think has to be done, because I think it is absolutely disgraceful that somebody like President Clinton should be able to get away with it.
Yes, I mean, that was one of my questions. There's a question from Alex, but going on from that, I mean, you've given up a lot and you've fought hard to tell your side of the story, and publishing it first as a novel and then as the unredacted diaries. And I was wondering what had driven you so much to tell the story. Well,
the novel, I wanted to tell a love story. I'm not a novelist. I've written one novel before, which was known in the family as the SSTN, the sexy, steamy, trashy novel. And I actually wanted to write something slightly more serious, although that was based on sort of on truth. And I felt so strongly that people don't really know what happened in prior to Operation Storm and in Operation Storm. So I wrote the novel partly because I wanted to see if I could write a plausible love story, and partly because I felt that here was a story that had to be told. And I had no intention then of writing what I see as the truth. But having written the Death Sting, which you very kindly gave us a party for in London, somebody did say, look, you've actually got to go one further. You really ought to put the truth down. I mean, I was a tiny, tiny, tiny cog. I had no influence. I had nothing to do with it. I just witnessed one or two things. There were wonderful monitors, wonderful, wonderful monitors who were deeply involved, much more deeply involved than I was in the interior, and who probably did make a difference. I'm afraid in the end, as I say in the book, right at the very beginning, I made not a jot of difference to anything that happened. So I suppose in a way, subconsciously, perhaps when I got back, I thought perhaps I could make a difference by writing about it.
Thanks. If I can, there's another comment left by Alex, who said, let's not forget that Franjo Tudjman served in the NDH's Ustasha Ministry of Defence from 1941 to 42. It was only after that that he became a freedom fighter and a communist. And there's another, Vera, there was also a huge ethnic cleansing from the cities during that period. And Marcos said 15 to 20,000 Serbs cleansed from Western Slavonia, May 1995, 3 months earlier. So adding to the numbers of those ethnically cleansed. And Jelena said, thank you very much, Ewan, for your very interesting talk. Why do you think Clinton was so personally determined to have Operation Storm?
Well, I think the answer to that is he was facing an election. And he was, I think there was pressure put on him to sort out the problem in Yugoslavia. And I'm not sure if I can find the quote here, but it's in the book. But he was determined that he would sort out the problem. And if you read the book, you can, right at the very end, when I do the sort of summing up, it was quite clear that he felt that the public opinion would help him win the election if he sorted out the Serb problem. I think it's as crude as that. And well, he did. Well, sorry, he didn't, but that's what he tried to do. Well, he did. I don't know. Sorry, he didn't sort out the problem, but he sorted it out in favor of Croatia, which, of course, I think the Americans somehow wanted. They wanted to see peace. And in the book somewhere, I quote that the Americans say, "Well, we've got peace," which, of course, is absolute rubbish.
And I think, sorry, Michael, I think Michael Shuttleworth, if you can unmute yourself, Michael, or I don't know if Ivan has to do that.
It was only just an aside, but I think possibly that Clinton was deeply immersed with the scandal of Monica Lewinsky at about that time, and he indulged the classic political motive of diversionary tactic in, as far as Americans are concerned, you know, this was a European problem and not an American one. So that was when he got involved in, not very successfully, in former Yugoslavia.
I should tell you, Olga, that Michael spent 2 years in Belgrade. Actually, he spent in some time in Knin and also knew the dreadful Jean-Pierre Thibault. Bad luck, Michael.
And there's another just comment from Jelena Stepanovic to say Slavonia started even earlier, the ethnic cleansing. My family had to escape in 1991. Thank you for your presentation.
Well, the sadness is that that I had to write the book.
Mm.
If there'd been no ethnic cleansing, I'd just sit back and look after the sheep.
Is there anything else that anyone, sorry, I cut you off, but is there anything anyone else wants to make a comment or say anything?
Stunned.
From silence.
Olga, Ian Moore has...
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Ewan, one's interested in honourable...
You've gone mute, Ian. Ian, hello.
I think it's...
people being required to do dishonourable things, a fine fellow. Was he moved on to make way for your second French boss, who would then turn a blind eye to what was going on, in your opinion?
Ian, I'm very sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
What I'm saying is you worked for two Frenchmen, and in your description, the first one was an honourable soul, but perhaps was being required to do dishonourable things by turning a blind eye to the embargo breaches. Was he replaced by your second Frenchman for the reason that he couldn't live with the situation?
Well, I can't answer the question. I don't know why. Well, I think Paul Otteler was replaced in the normal course of events. When Jean-Pierre took over, and I think Michael will help me with this, he was absolutely determined to undo everything that Paul Otteler had done. And that meant sacking me, I mean, I was sacked 3 or 4 times from being team leader at Split. He shuffled all the monitors around throughout the whole of his area. Whether Paul Otteler before that knew about the embargo being broken, I have no idea, because I wasn't actually in Croatia. I wasn't on the Dalmatian coast where it was all happening. So I don't know, but I suspect Paul didn't. He was a totally honourable man. He's still around. And as I said, he went on to be ambassador to one of the Middle Eastern countries. Jean-Pierre was a bitter and twisted man for reasons way beyond Yugoslavia. And he was determined to undo everything. The British and the Germans in Zagreb, in the headquarters of the European Community Monitoring Mission, were appalled at what he did, but nobody was brave enough to tell him to stop. And he ruined the monitoring on the coast of Dalmatia, which in those days, the Dalmatian coast was, and actually remains, the powerhouse of the future of Croatia. And if we couldn't monitor the Dalmatian coast properly, we weren't actually going to be able to advise. I say we, I mean, I'm talking about people in Brussels, weren't going to be able to advise the Croatians how to regenerate their economy. The whole economy of Croatia, by and large, is based on the Dalmatian coast. I'm probably getting off the scent now, but Jean-Pierre wasn't interested in that. He was only interested in his own persona.
Could I take you, because we're running out of time, and there's 2 questions, one from Marco and one from Stan. If I go to Stan's first, he says, you mentioned the Germans supported Croats, despite being rather embarrassed by the Nazi insignia. Did you ever get a feel for the origin of German support for Croatia? Was it in support of EU expansionism or economic benefit, or was it truly World War II allies with hidden Nazi?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that question, Stan, but all I do know is that amongst the EU monitors out there, we often discussed the fact that World War II hadn't yet finished. And that's almost all I can say. It was, heaven's sakes, we were all European countries. We should have been fighting together to prevent things like Operation Storm. All I can say is that, I'm getting off the scent again, but to see swastikas on soldiers' armbands, to see the Ustatsi U on buildings, it was despicable. I mean, I would probably have resigned anyway if I hadn't been told to falsify my reports. To be brutally honest, it was beyond my comprehension what was going on out there, and I couldn't wait to get out of it in the end. And rather childishly, when I got into the airplane, having resigned, I looked back at Croatia and I raised 2 fingers and I said, frankly, sod the lot of you. I'm sorry about that, Olga. But of course, I didn't know Operation Storm was, well, I knew it was going to happen because in my letters in the book, you can see when I kept on saying to my, not MI6 minder, but my Foreign Office minder, he kept on saying it won't happen. I said, I bet you jolly well will, and it'll happen sooner rather than later. I was wrong. It happened later rather than sooner, but it happened.
And thank you, Ewan. And the final question from Marco. He says, has your balanced view of the responsibility of all parties, including outsiders, being taken negatively within the UK, which is more accustomed to keeping the black hats on the Serbs and the white hats on everyone else?
Again, I'm not quite sure how to answer that, except that what disturbed me out there was the holier-than-thou attitude of Croatia towards everybody. You could never blame the Croatians for anything. And the Americans didn't. As I said, the Secretary of State said that only Serbs commit ethnic cleansing. When I got back to England, I wrote an article for various yachting magazines saying it's safe to go back, but watch out. This is actually a promise I made to the Split Chamber of Commerce, that I would try and encourage British yachtsmen to go back there when I got home. And I waited a year until after Operation Storm, and then I did. And but it received very negative letters from the Croatian ambassador in England, and then some supportive letters from British people who kept their yachts out there. I'm not answering the question. As I said, I just raised 2 fingers to the whole of Croatia, that is, not Serbia. I felt so sorry that that America, that grown-up countries like America and Germany had supported such a repugnant act. And yet here they are saying that the Germans shouldn't have committed the Holocaust. Well, for God's sakes, they destroyed a whole country. Krajina was a country, albeit not in the legal sense, but it was geographically a country, a separate country. Destroyed, gone, nothing left. I think 1% of Serbs now still live in Krajina. Is that right?
I'm sure it must be something like that. Marco's nodding, so I think that's right. There's from Zvezdana. She says, "Thank you for your very interesting talk. It is so upsetting to hear about all the Serbs being forced to leave Croatia and the war crimes that are committed against them. At the same time, the Serbs are portrayed as genocidal people. I was in Osijek in 1991-92 and witnessed crimes against the Serbs, the famous sellotape murders and Branimir Glavaš, etc. And nothing happened, I think, is Zvezdana's point, and Stan's. And I think then, because we're going past our hour, Stan has asked a question on, sorry, I can't get to now, about Captain Dragan. That in the book you say that Captain Dragan said that he wanted peace. Did you feel that he was being honest about this?
Short answer is yes. I only met him over 2 sessions. First one, as I said, officially with the UN, with the EU. Second one in civilian clothes and rather dodgy arrangements. I actually took to him. He gave me all sorts of brochures about the good works he was doing, and I had no reason to believe they were false. In fact, I sent them off to MI6. I think he was actually married to a German, but he didn't live there. He was a great supporter of the British monarchy, not that that should influence one's decision making. Yes, I did. I felt he was actually trying to do good. But the interesting thing was, not only was he tried in Croatia, but he was also sentenced to serve his time in Croatia, whereas everybody else was sentenced, was in the International Court of whatever it was called. But he was done in Croatia. They were absolutely gunning for him, but I've never actually discovered why. In my time knowing him, which was only over a period of 6 weeks, I suppose, there was no indication of all the briefs that he gave me that he had done anything wrong. You've gone.
I know I've gone, but here someone
Oh, there
asked
you
where
are.
can we buy the book, and you can buy it on Amazon or directly from Ewen.
Cheaper on Amazon.
Cheaper on Amazon, as are most things, unfortunately. Stan says, I want to say a big thank you for your time today and also for the writing the book, despite the difficulties you faced in finding a publisher. So unless there's anyone else, I mean, I'd like to thank Ewen once again for his time for writing the book and trying to get the message of what he was asked to do across. I'd like to thank you for giving up to joining this evening. And I'd like to thank Ewan, who behind the scenes has been managing the technology for this evening's meeting. So thank you, everyone. There's some other events if you're interested in Serbian Month. We've got a concert, we've got an attempt to break a world record in stuffing peppers. So there's something for everybody. But once again, many thanks, Ewan, for giving up your time and telling us about your book, which you can buy, as I said, on Amazon. And you can also get Death's Sting on Amazon as well. So thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for a great event, Ewan, and hopefully see you at some other events. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Olga.
Bye.
Thank you.